Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911 Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host, and we're back with another interview about the consequences of the climate crisis, in this case for seniors. You know, every generation is going to feel the impact of climate change, and at a time when demographics are already working against a rising tide of seniors, they face particularly dire challenges. While millennials, Gen Z, and children face long-term impacts on their health, economic opportunities, and lifestyles, retiring baby boomers must also reckon with the consequences of extreme heat, the potential for disruption of their lives by wildfire, food shortages, and the economic impact of climate change on their retirement nest egg. And our guest today, Chris Orestis, is the president of Retirement Genius and a nationally recognized expert on retirement issues. How should older people be rethinking their assumptions about retirement? What changes to existing plans should boomers be making? Well, we've got the guy with the answers, so let's get to it. You can learn more about Chris Orestis at www.retirementgenius, all one word, retirementgenius.com. Welcome to the show, Chris. How are you today?
Great. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this discussion.
Well, you know, on the one hand, I'm pleased to have you here, but on the other, this is a really hard conversation for a lot of older people to think about. And, you know, I'm closer to retirement than not, so it's something that's on my mind. You recently contributed an article to Earth911, and you write in there that health issues are a critical concern for retirement during the climate crisis. But, you know, the other thing that you call out is heat, which cuts both ways. We've seen record highs, and in the case of Texas's deep freeze last winter, record lows. So how do you suggest retirees start to vet their potential living locations to deal with those consequences of extreme weather?
Yeah, let's always remember that, you know, the misnomer of global warming and the idea that everywhere is just warming up. And what really this is about is extreme weather events and things showing up in places where typically they wouldn't have showed up. And a good example of heat issues is what happened at the beginning of the summer up in Oregon. Well over 100 people died because of heat waves. And
Yep.
Seniors are among the most vulnerable population. When you look at the studies that are out about the health impacts of climate change, seniors are consistently cited as being among the most vulnerable. And that's true. It was the same thing with the COVID pandemic. Seniors are a very vulnerable population when it comes to their exposure to health issues. So when looking at where to live and how to live and factoring in heat among just one of the issues. Sure. Let's be clear. This isn't just about trying to pick heat or cold. There's so many different factors that have started to come into play now that as seniors are considering where they live, where they should live, particularly in those cases where they're thinking about relocating, maybe establishing a place where they're going to live part of the year. I've been recommending to people, are you sure you want to buy a retirement place in a state like Florida or Texas or Arizona or California, where ironically, as all this is going on, those real estate markets are booming right now. They're still among the most desired places for people to retire to live in retirement. Yet they are obviously among the most impacted by what we're seeing. So first, I'm recommending to seniors, does it make sense to buy, or maybe you should be renting before you make that purchase commitment to be in a zone that is potentially in jeopardy by wildfires, by heat waves, by hurricanes, by rising coastal flooding or near a flood basin. You've got to consider maybe it makes more sense to rent than to buy.
Well, it sounds like one of the consequences that you have to really keep firmly in mind is the value of a home, which is usually the biggest asset in an American's portfolio, is no longer an assurance that you're going to have future cash from a lucrative sale. Would you recommend to somebody who lives in one of those areas that is at risk to take advantage of the high prices on homes now and sell in order to have more money for potentially renting a place that would allow them to come or go based on the climate threat?
Yeah, I've kind of been looking at this and I've said to people, this is kind of like a game of musical chairs.
Mhm.
And at what point does somebody get left standing without a chair? You know, right now you're seeing these incredible home values. There's obviously a housing crisis in the country. And you know what? It's interesting. It's not just buying; it's also renting.
Right.
People are struggling to find rentals, let alone buying. If it were my parents
Mhm.
living in a state like Florida or Arizona, I would be encouraging them to cash out at what could be right around the top of the market, and then look to relocate to other areas that look like they're going to be in better condition to withstand at least the next few years, coming decade or two. Places like in the upper Midwest, you know,
Mhm.
that keeps being pointed to as areas that could be much more environmentally stable and safer for somebody that's living in a Florida or Arizona. You cash out at the top of one of those markets, it puts you in a position where you've really got some money to work with to possibly relocate to a area that will have a better chance of being more stable over the next 10 and 20 years, and or instead of buying down in an area like that, considering whether you'd rent or other parts of the country where you might consider spending time other than your home base.
So I want to get to the idea of the climate haven that you just called out in a moment. But let me ask you this. If you were selling or buying a house today, regardless of what you're doing, in one of those regions, would you be looking to see a discount on the present value of the house based on the future loss of value due to climate change? Would you use that as part of your negotiation to get a lower price if you're buying, or would you try not to do that if you were trying to sell?
You know, that's just not a factor yet. That because the demand for buying and even renting properties is so high, the person on the side of the table that's trying to buy or rent has no negotiating power. And certainly bringing an esoteric type of topic at this point in about future impacts of climate change, it's not going to get you anywhere today. Now, listen, where we are today compared to where we were 10 years ago, and think now, where will we be 10 years from now? I think that is going to become a factor. And
Yeah,
in
I
fact,
agree.
I think we're going to start to see within our own country climate migration happening. You know, we're watching people that are being driven to the US border coming up through Mexico from other countries because a big part of what they're dealing with are issues related to climate change and how it's impacting them. And that just keeps moving its way up north more and more and more, where we've really watched it over the last 5 years become very apparent this year more so than ever. I mean, think about this. There was, and we're not even done this year, but in 2021, it looks like we're going to hit around $100 billion of insurable property damage
Mhm.
for because of weather related incidents like either floods, hurricanes, wildfires, and that party is just getting started.
So, what do you see happening in terms of the cost of flood and wildfire insurance for seniors? Should they be planning on regular increases in their premiums because of climate change?
Not only regular increases, but get ready for significant spikes. You know, the insurance industry is very nervous about what is going on here. They are watching very closely the impact on their bottom line, and they will have a lot to say about what happens with the adaptation to climate change in this country. They collect over $1.5 trillion of premiums in property and casualty insurance on an annual basis. And they do not, and they're in the business of collecting more in premiums than they pay out in benefits. So
Right.
when they have all of a sudden this rising tide, forgive the pun,
Mhm.
of weather-related events and catastrophes that are hitting them, they're going to have a lot to say about what's going to happen, where they will even consider giving insurance, let alone what it's going to cost. So people should be anticipating increases in costs and not just gradual. There could be some significant spikes, requirements in some areas to have flood and other types of disaster insurance where it's not required right now, and the government backing off of subsidies towards that. And we're really going to get to a position where certain areas of the country, because of climate change, are only going to be affordable and a major reason will be because of the insurance issue to the super rich.
So let's talk about the government a little bit. There are going to be more seniors than there are today. That means that fewer people are going to be paying into Social Security. And we know that a lot of folks have depended on disaster relief rather than having the appropriate insurance for flooding and wildfire. Do you see the government being able to spend more, or are they going to have to continue to scale back like we're hearing they may need to do with Social Security?
Well, we're seeing it now. There's reports of people that have been impacted by disasters this year still waiting for federal relief. People that were underinsured, people that didn't have the right insurance. I mean, think about the storm that went through, Pennsylvania, New York with all that flooding.
Right.
Those were people who weren't living in flood zones. They didn't have flood insurance. So they're all out of pocket and they're waiting for government relief that for many people still hasn't come. So the ability of the government and the U.S. taxpayer to pay for this increasing situation and what it's cost people on an individual basis and then across the board for everybody. I mean, that's the whole model of insurance, is that the risk is spread, the costs are spread. So, somebody who's living in one part of the country is going to potentially feel an increase in their own premiums coming from disasters to help cover other parts of the country. And the government's ability to keep up with that, we're already seeing what we're doing in terms of budget deficits and deficit spending in this country on an annual basis. Now add this to the mix. Where's the money going to come from?
So the other thing that the government has typically stepped in to help with is long-term medical care under the Medicare program. Should people be rethinking their healthcare coverage, and particularly elder care plans, based on the changes you're seeing? And particularly, should they be buying some form of long-term care coverage to deal with heat issues, for instance?
Yeah, we've certainly seen issues around heat and now also air quality, right? We're seeing a lot of issues in seniors that are being exacerbated by these wildfires, and the breathing conditions have become difficult. That impacts their respiratory systems, which is often one of the most fragile systems of the body for seniors. So Medicare, providing excellent coverage to anybody who's on Medicare, 65 and above, you qualify for Medicare, is there to provide great coverage. But like everything else, it wasn't designed for and anticipating such an escalation of events, such an escalation of claims, people needing services. So the more people can do to try and find ways to augment what they have from coverage, the better they're going to be. And yes, long-term care insurance, life insurance, using unique strategies with those types of vehicles to not only protect your future, but even help take care of your present. We're seeing more seniors who have life insurance policies turn to something called a life settlement, where they're selling their life insurance policy to help raise cash immediately to then use towards their cost of care or their long-term care. So it's these kinds of financial adaptations people are going to need to make in preparing for the eventuality of long-term care when all things are equal in just in normal times. That's a major thing to take on. Now you layer on this and the pressure of either being impacted by a catastrophic event or just the erosion of your environment because of ongoing wildfires and air quality, rising sea levels, impacting fresh water tables. There's a whole bunch of things that are happening that aren't making the news every day. It's just daily. The creeping of heat rising is bringing airborne diseases through mosquitoes and ticks more and more north. People are getting hit by that 10 years ago you wouldn't even have thought about. And you've got to be preparing for the eventuality that you might need some very expensive health care that you're not in a position to pay for either out of pocket or that your insurance or Medicare may not cover.
Well, and another source of income, or rather, I should say cash, is the reverse mortgage. But because home values may start to collapse as a result of the incursion of seawater into drinking water, as well as flooding the neighborhood. That's also something that we no longer can take for granted, that the value of our house is there as a backup. How do you recommend that folks think about that strategic decision to move and when to move? And this goes back to your comment earlier about climate havens. And in your article, you cite David Pogue, who's How to Prepare for Climate Change, a practical guide to surviving the chaos, suggests that places like the Great Lakes region are potential havens for people seeking to get away from climate change. So is now the time to start to think about exercising that strategy?
To me, now is the time to start thinking about it. And I'll tell you what, that's actually, that whole region of the country is a beautiful region of the country. There's great quality of living, great cost of living. And, for some people, if they're considering where they're going to set their roots for retirement, you could do a lot worse than to be in that part of the, not only the United States, but the world. I do recommend that people start thinking about it, maybe even plan to visit and check it out, which is something I always encourage people to do when they're thinking about where they might want to spend more time in retirement. And it's not just in the US, it's also internationally. There's some great havens around the world that people are looking at. I know there's a lot of people who are looking at moving to other parts of the world. Where the value of their money is higher, the quality of living is good, and it's in sort of bands geographically where it can better sustain changes in climate. But always, kick the tires before you buy. You really need to visit, spend a little time, and look into it. But when it comes to your current home and your current environment, it's a tough call to move, right? What if you're surrounded by family?
Now, here's the thing about these climate havens, and I've written about this and spent some time thinking about it because I'm near retirement age. The idea of the haven is predicated on the state of these places today. And if 1 million people moved to Duluth, Minnesota, and I used to live near there, and I know that there's plenty of room for them, but the resources are still constrained. And the price of homes there will start to skyrocket. So it may be an illusion that there is anywhere we can run from this. And you even call out that nowhere is insulated from the impact of climate change. So is not going back to the question, don't you have to move now if you want to get in there at a reasonable price?
Well, supply and demand, right? I mean, watch over the next 5 years. We'll at some point, this ironic push of people still moving in great numbers and driving up the property values of parts of this country that are among the most at risk and the most currently being impacted by climate change. It kind of baffles me when I see people who are still moving in great numbers to put themselves right into the wildfire zone or right into the areas of sea level rise and increasing hurricane activity. I don't know how much longer that lasts, whether people just on their own kind of intuitively look at it and say, well, does it make sense to be going this way? And again, insurance companies saying, well, if you want to live here, the rules of insurance have changed entirely to deal with the reality of what today is not what it was 10 or 20 years ago. Some people are going to be priced out. And so for me, I kind of feel like some of these markets are probably pretty frothy and at their top. And some other markets are much more accessible 5 to 10 years from now. I think some people are going to look back and say, wow, why didn't I make the move 5 or 10 years earlier?
Yeah, I think that's foresight and afterthought are two completely different things. And particularly when making investments, it's easy to get caught up in the safety of where you are today rather than the benefits or advantages of making the change that you aren't comfortable with. There's another big area that I wanted to ask you about, and that is, how do you plan to ensure that you have enough food and water as well as resources to heat your home? Should older people be planning to set aside additional funds for buying enough food on an ongoing basis?
Well, we're watching it happen right now, aren't we? I mean, this year we've seen an incredible spike in inflation, disruptions to the supply chain, and we're as it resolves itself around COVID, climate change is just going to step in and continue to exacerbate those situations. And it's not going to happen overnight. You know, if you're a senior and you're in your 70s, your 80s, I'm not suggesting sell and run. In some ways, this conversation might be even more applicable to somebody who's in their later 40s or 50s or approaching their 60s. Somebody who's going to retire over the next 5, 10, 15 years really needs to be thinking future forward. So I don't want to scare seniors today into thinking, oh my God, if I don't get out of where I am by tomorrow, I'm not going to make it.
Mhm.
But you do need to deal with the realities of that your environment is changing. It can impact your health, and it can impact the ability to get to food. Go to grocery stores right now. You're seeing more and more scarcity in items. You go to restaurants, there's more and more things that you can't get that are on the menu. Prices have gone up. And I have recommended to seniors, particularly if they're suffering from food insecurity because either they can't afford it or they can't fight it or they can't access it,
Mhm.
is to reach out for help. Make sure that your family, your loved ones know your situation. You can take advantage of services like Meals on Wheels, which do a fantastic job of either bringing food to people where they are or providing food in areas where people can gather. So people can deal with this. And I also encourage people, think about what you're eating, and are there things that you could access that are available through local farmers markets or farmers unions? Could you even grow some things yourself? Get into some gardening. How can you become a little more self-sufficient, source things a little more locally? And if you are in a crisis when it comes to food, look for help, look for resources, because it is out there.
So I really appreciate you taking the time to sort of break all this down. Could I ask you, as we close this conversation, to share 3 things that you suggest somebody planning to retire in the next 5 years, 10 years should do today to prepare themselves, their portfolio, and their family for the impact of the climate crisis?
Yes. One, it starts with your health, your strength, your health. One of the smartest financial investments anybody can make in their future is taking care of their health today. And as the climate crisis grows, as catastrophic events hit areas, as just growing change keeps coming to areas, one of the best ways that anybody's going to be able to deal with this is to be healthy and to be strong. And that will translate into helping, number 2, their finances.
Mhm.
You want to be saving, you want to be investing, you want to be as financially capable as you can to weather these storms, to live a quality life. There's still plenty of opportunity in our lives and in our futures to live a well-balanced quality life and lifestyle, but it takes making smart investments in your health, smart investments in your finances, and then taking stock of where you live, where it is you think you want to spend time as you move forward into retirement. Again, does it make sense to buy in certain areas that are high risk, or maybe you just rent and visit, and maybe you start exploring other areas where you might want to spend time, maybe live, and stay well connected to your family. Stay in contact, stay well connected, so that you're able to work together as a unit, give each other support. And as a senior, don't let yourself become isolated. Don't let yourself get out of touch. And as family members, don't think that no news is good news when it comes to your elderly parents or relatives. Oftentimes, they tend to be proud, they tend to be private, they don't want to share the struggles that they're going through, they don't want to be a burden. So check in on them, stay in contact, and particularly if some kind of a weather event is coming, make sure you know where they are, make sure you know how they can get to safety, that they have information and resources to get to safety if something's coming.
Well, Chris, I want to thank you for taking time to talk with us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being able to join you. And this is a discussion that we are all going to keep having for quite some time.
We've been talking with Chris Orestis. He's the president of Retirement Genius, and you can learn more about Chris and Retirement Genius at www.retirementgenius.com. That's all one word, Retirement Genius. Folks, please take a few minutes and talk with your parents, your grandparents. Let them know that you care and that you're thinking about them during the climate crisis. Make them aware of the fact that these changes are coming if they're not already talking to you about it. Chris's advice about staying in touch during crises is also applicable every day as we move into this very uncertain future we're facing. Please take a few minutes to share this podcast or others that we've done with your friends and family. Let's get people talking about these ideas. You know, more ideas means less waste and more efficient economy and a lower environmental impact for all of us. This is Earth911 Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and we'll be back soon with another interview. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourselves, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.